Alright, Algebra 1 folks. Right now I'm looking in your big white packet, page 142. And that page is labeled up at the top as factoring, and then the section below it is called factors. And they give you a definition there of factor. They say a factor of a number is a whole number that divides evenly into that number. So we're looking for division, to divide without getting a decimal or a fraction or a remainder of any sort. So we're going to do a quiz today, and we'll continue with these quizzes where we're going to have whole numbers. We're getting back to whole numbers here, and we're going to find all positive factors of these whole numbers. Okay, so we're going to put the polynomials on the side for a couple of days. We'll get back to the polynomials, but we're gonna examine factors of whole numbers, because what that's going to help us do is then to look at how can we find factors of polynomials. So real quick here, I'm going to look at problems 1 and 2 on page 142, kind of in the middle of that page, and I'm going to do my method of finding all these factors, what I call a factor T-chart. So the instructions that they give us here is they want us to write all the factors of each number, and they've worked the first problem in each one for us as an example. So all the numbers that divide into 3, that's what we're looking for here. That's our task, is to find all numbers that divide into 3, and no remainders, decimals or fractions are allowed there. Okay, so that's the deal. So what I like to do for this is I like to do what I call a factor T-chart. So I'll take the number that I'm looking for, the factors of, which is 3, and I'll do this kind of T-chart here. Okay. Now, 1 is always a factor. 1 is a factor of every whole number, because you can do any whole number divided by 1, and it works out. Any number divided by 1 is that number. In general, you might remember, like, x divided by 1 is just x. It doesn't matter what value you have there for x. So any whole number divided by 1 always works. Now, I have a left side and a right side to this T-chart, so I'm thinking to myself, 1 times what? What 1's on the left, what number matches up with it on the right? 1 times what gives me 3, and hopefully you know there that it's 1 times 3 is how we get 3. If you weren't sure, if you were thinking to yourself, how can I figure it out? 1 times what gives me 3? Technically, you could do some algebra here. You could say 1 times x gives you 3, and then you would divide both sides by 1, and your 1's would cancel there, and you would get x equals 3. So 1 times 3 would give you 3. Okay. So I'm going to be methodical about this. I'm going to have a process. I'm not just going to guess numbers. I'm going to have a process. So on the left side, I start with 1. I always start with 1. And then next, I'm going to try 2. So I'm thinking to myself, 2 times what gives me 3? And again, I can use some algebra here. I can say to myself, 2 times, I'll call it y this time, 2 times some number gives me 3. And I wonder, what is that number? So if I'm good at algebra, I can divide both sides by 2. So my 2's on the left cancel there, and I come up with this number is 3 divided by 2, which is 1.5. But remember here, we said no remainders, no decimals, no fractions. So this is not allowed. You can't have 1.5. You can't have a decimal there. So we say, sorry 2, but you're out. You're not a factor of 3. Okay, so again, I'm being methodical here on the left. I started with 1, next I went to 2. Next would be 3, but if you notice, 3 is already on the right side. So we've rounded out here. That's what one of the teachers I used to work with called it. He called it rounded out. As soon as you have a number on the right side, you're looking for a number, but it's on the right side, you can go, I'm done. So that's it. We have 1 as a factor, and 3 as a factor, and that's it. That's our complete list of factors of 3. So next, if we look at the factors of 9, it's the same idea as 3. We want all the numbers that divide into, but now this time it's not 3, now it's 9. All the numbers that divide into 9 with no remainder, no decimal, no fraction. So again, I like to have a T-chart here, and I always start with 1, and 1 times 9 gives me 9. Let's rewrite that 9 so it's a little bit nicer. 1 times 9 will give me 9. So this is saying that 1 is a factor of 9 and 9 is a factor of 9. And that's always going to be true. 1 is always going to be a factor, and the number itself is always going to be a factor. But after 1, I'm going to check 2. And I'm going to think to myself, 2 times what gives me 9? Now if you notice over here, when we did 3, we kind of have a little shortcut here. So it was 3 divided by 1. When I was checking if 1 was a factor, I did 3 divided by 1 and I got a whole number. When I was checking if 2 was a factor, I did 3 divided by 2. So the 3 was because that was the number I was looking for. I was looking for factors of 3. So here I can take 9 and I can divide it by what I want to check here. So I can check 9 divided by 2 to see if 2 is a factor. And remember, you get to use your calculators here. But when I do 9 divided by 2, I get 4.5. And we said, okay, no decimals. So that means that 2 is sadly not a factor of 9. Okay, but our search continues. I had 1, then 2, now I'm going to do 3. And I think to myself, 3 times what gives me 9? And again, the shortcut is take that number 9 and divide by the potential factor. 9 divided by 3, I'm hoping to get a whole number. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So that means 3 is good. 3 is on the list. It is a factor, and it's 3 times 3 to get me 9. Okay, now remember over here when we said once you get a number on the right side, you're done. We went 1, 2, over here on this first problem, we went 1, 2, 3, but 3 was already on the right side. Here we went 1, 2, 3, 4 would be next, but 3 that we used shows up also on the right side. So once you get over to the right side, once you have a number and it occurs on the right side, we are done. So we are ready to list the factors of 9, all of the factors of 9. So we'd have 1, which is always going to be a factor. 2 wasn't in. 2 is not a factor, but we checked it. 3 is a factor. We don't have to write it twice, even though it occurs 2 times on my T-chart. And then 9, and that's it. And the beauty is we don't have to check 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those are not going to be factors. It's just 1, 3, and 9. That's it. Those are all our factors there. And then for number 1, the last problem they have for number 1, we're looking for the factors of 14. Again, to come back over to the first problem here, we're talking about all the numbers that divide into 14. Okay, so we're switching that 3 now. It was 3 on the first problem, then it was 9 on the second problem. Now it's 14. We want all the numbers that divide into 14, but again, no remainders, no decimals, no fractions. So to organize my work, I like to do that factor T-chart. I'm looking for factors of 14. Always start with 1, just to be organized, and 1 in the number. 1 times 14 gives you 14. Okay, again, you could do 14 divided by 1 if you weren't sure. 14 divided by 1, that's going to give you 14. Okay. After 1, we're going to check 2. And if you're not sure, you can use that calculator or double check in your head. If we take 14 divided by 2, we get a whole number. We get 7. So 2 matches up with 7. It means that 7 is also going to be a factor here. 1, 2, next comes 3. And I'm thinking to myself, 14 times what gives me 3? Or as a shortcut, I can just do 14 divided by 3. This one gives me a decimal, though. That gives me 14.66666. It's 4.6 repeating, or 4 2/3. But I say, you know what? Fractions, decimals, remainder, not allowed. So 3 is not a factor. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I check 4 here, 14 divided by 4. Can I do 4 times something to get 14? That's going to give me 3.5. That's a decimal. Decimals are not allowed, so 4 is out, but at least I checked it. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes next. Is 14 divided by 5, does that give me a whole number? 14 divided by 5, that's going to give me 2.8, I believe. It's going to give me a decimal for sure, so 5 is out, not a factor of 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is 6 a factor of 14? Well, I can check that by doing 14 divided by 6. I'm going to squeeze that over here. And when I do that, I know it goes in 2 whole times. It gives me a remainder of 2. The calculator is going to say 0.3333, etc. And I say, sorry, 6, but you're not a factor of 14. Next would be 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But 7's already on the list. I've gotten to the right side, so I'm done. I've rounded out. I have found all the factors. Again, I don't have to check 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Once I get over to this right side, I am done. I've got all my factors there. So all the positive factors of 14, we've got 1, 2, and then going on the right side, 7 and 14. And that's it. Those are all of my factors of 14. Okay. I was going to go through and do number 2 for you also, with some of the bigger numbers that might be a little more difficult or like a little more time intensive, but unfortunately my technology wasn't working here, so I'm going to leave it there.